folks, wherever in the world that you are. It's V the Guerrilla Economist coming to you live on Rogue Money Radio, and we have with us a very, very special guest, someone whose mind and thinking I deeply not only respect, but I admire. He is one of the most clarion voices that is out there in regards to what is truly going on. Very few people, and I've been following his work for quite a number of years, and I've basically, chomping at the bit to have this gentleman on. And it's an honor for me to have him on. It's an honor, and I want to thank CJ for setting this whole thing up, and for him to join us here at Rogue Money to share his views with us. It's for lack of a better word, mind blowing. I love it. You're in for a real treat here, folks. We have F. William Engdahl. If you don't know about F. William Engdahl, he's written, on various websites. I've seen his work posted at globalresearch.ca, to Russia Insider, Sputnik. I mean, everywhere you could be, Strategic Culture. I mean, you name it. His work is out there, and one of the best minds in terms of being able to break down the complex geopolitical, geostrategic, and geoeconomic paradigms and how things are changing at a rapid clip from west to east, as well as the fact that we as Americans, folks, we gave away our birthright for next to nothing. We gave away sacred liberty for next to nothing, and we've allowed these wolves, we allowed these tares to grow amongst us, which is the military-industrial complex that William Engdahl so brilliantly details. He's been a researcher and a writer about the world's political scene for over 30 years. He has various books on geopolitics, the interaction between international power politics, economics, and geography. It's been translated. His works have been translated to over 14 foreign languages, from Chinese to French, from German to Japanese. His website, folks, is williamengdahl.com, and his books included. And I'm telling you right now, go get it wherever you, in Amazon or even William's own sites. WilliamEngdahl.com /books is Manifest Destiny, Democracy as Cognitive Dissonance. So without further ado, let me introduce the man of the hour, Sir William F. William Engdahl. Thank you, William, for being on. It is my pleasure and my joy to have you on, sir.
Glad to be here.
Sir, you want me to call you William, Mr. Engdahl, however way you want me to address you? All right. William, we have a lot of things going on geostrategically, geopolitically. Many Americans simply do not understand, number one, the scope of these events, because let's be honest, most Americans can't even find Syria on a map. And of course, there's that dissonance, that dissonance combined with a normalcy bias, because we all think, many Americans think, that their lives will continue on unchanged forever, perpetually forever, with no change. But that is not the case. So, sir, could you break down for us some of the things that are going on in this world, especially even before you get there, how you got your start into this whole entire global situation, and what awakened you to the powers that be, so to speak?
I would go back to the time when I was a graduate student at the University of Stockholm in the early 1970s during the Vietnam War. And there I began to look seriously at what that war was all about, and could not find any positive answer in terms of peace or development or security or something positive. It was simply a war to create chaos and destruction. And that, I suppose, began my looking at the world through a different view. And I would say over the years, I have changed that view many times, but the basic core is what fundamentally is positive for the majority of mankind, and what's being done by whom to destroy that. And the latter part has absorbed me for many years and many books, about 9 I count at this point.
Yeah. What do you see currently at some of the, there's so many things that are happening from the Middle East, which is right now just turning into a hot spot. We have recently, we have the Saudi prince, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, joining hands with the strange bedfellow that is Benjamin Netanyahu, and they are now wanting war with Lebanon against Hezbollah and Lebanon after their Syria fiasco exploded in their faces. What's your take on the Middle East situation, sir?
The Middle East, if you go back to the Bush administration, W. Bush, back in 2003, 2004, around the occupation of Iraq, which had nothing to do with the war on terror or Osama bin Laden, but the propaganda line was fed to the American public, and most Americans have no time to really research what's actually going on, so they take what's in the morning newspaper, evening news on television, and that kind of defines the world for them. It's not a fault, it's just a reality, and it's a manipulated reality.
Right.
So the George W. Bush administration, Condoleezza Rice and company, proposed after the occupation of Iraq a catastrophic war that's cost American taxpayers trillions of dollars for nothing but destruction. They proposed something called the Greater Middle East Project. And the Greater Middle East Project, which created a big stir of controversy among American allies in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, so they toned it down a little bit, but it's still active, is to redraw the map of the entire Middle East to balkanize countries like Saudi Arabia, like Iraq, like Syria, like Iran, and create impotent, squabbling tribal entities like they've done in Libya, and use that to dominate the world's vast resources of oil and gas that are trapped in the Middle East, and use that to control the world economy. So everything that's going on today harkens back to that Greater Middle East Project. If you look on my website, I did an article about this recently in terms of what an article in the Army War College Journal, Armed Forces Journal in 2006 or 2007 by Colonel Ralph Peters. He talked about blood borders, redrawing the borders from Sykes-Picot in 1916 to create a Kurdistan that would take huge chunks from Turkey, from Iraq, from Iran, and from Syria, and create a synthetic state. The Kurdish people are not even one ethnic or religious unity, but the propaganda line is that they're all Kurds and therefore they deserve their nation. That probably trigger World War III. And the intervention of Russia when the Kurds, Barzani, who's a mafia gangster in Iraqi Kurdistan, or Iraqi Kurdish region, properly said, Barzani held this referendum, and it was promoted by Israeli intelligence, Mossad, who he's worked with since the 1960s or 70s. And that was an attempt to be the first step to a US-controlled Kurdistan that would destabilize the entire region. Fortunately, because of very skillful Russian oil diplomacy, I would call it, with Rosneft, it blew up in their face, and it didn't work. Barzani is now out of a job.
Yeah.
And let's see what develops. Now, this latest move by Prince Salman, the baby prince of 32 years, all of the world vast experience that he has as a statesman and so forth, was, as you point out, engineered largely by Israeli intelligence, the Mossad. And that should come as no surprise. The Saudi royal family is one of the most corrupt families on the face of the earth.
Right.
But Salman is a hothead who is, I would call him a psychopath.
William, is that the Prince Salman or King Salman?
Prince. The king is irrelevant.
Right.
Prince Salman, who's de facto the king right now.
Correct.
The king has Alzheimer's, according to various reports and so forth. He's just a straw figurehead. So this 32-year-old prince has managed to either kill or arrest all of the rival members of the House of Saud royal family, and destroy the system that was set up by Ibn Saud in the 1940s to ensure that there was stability and transition and not blood feuds between different branches of the family.
Sure.
So that Saudi Arabia would be a consensus monarchy. Not a very good monarchy, but a consensus monarchy. And now Salman, last Sunday, with the Night of the Long Knives, as some people call it, I think it's a good term, has just either murdered or arrested or imprisoned and confiscated the wealth of any potential rival. So this is a ticking time bomb, because when you take the prince who's the head of the Saudi Royal National Guard, this is a military force. This was King Abdullah's main military force. And they've got allies throughout the system who do not love this little princeling, Salman.
Yeah.
And think he's destroying the kingdom, which is true. He made this crazy war in Yemen to no effect. He made the war in Syria to no effect. He made the war just one after the other. And then the Israelis gave him this propaganda cover, tell him you want this reform, and then people will think you're the good guy and they're the bad guys. Corruption.
Right. Well, it's amazing to me. He's absolutely not only just a psychopath, but he's so just belligerent. He's rash. He doesn't think things through. And I've renamed him, William. I renamed him from MBS to LSD.
It might be true.
Yeah.
It might be true. I think he's the perfect prince for Donald Trump.
I mean, what's your take on that dynamic? Because here's the funny thing here, right? We've seen him, one of the princes that were caught up, actually, out of the few princes that were caught up, you had Merkin, who has deep ties to British intel. You have Prince Talal, the famous billionaire who used to badmouth Donald Trump. He's a notorious money launderer, but he's money laundering in the same way that the entire UAE, the United Arab Emirates, specifically Dubai, is like the money laundering capital of the Middle East. Then you have also Bandar Bush, who was caught up in the sting. Merkin was actually killed in that helicopter crash, which was not an accident by any stretch of the imagination. And now you got the crazy, out of control MBS. What is he doing? Is because we see him, putting away some bad guys here, but are we seeing a switch of one evil for a greater evil? And how does this tie back to the Trump administration?
Trump is the Trump administration, and the neocons around Trump are the ones who orchestrated this.
Yeah.
The pro Netanyahu faction around Trump, including Jared Kushner, the son.
Oh, yeah, he's the main one.
It seems that he plays an extraordinarily influential role in something he has no background or competence to do. But he does it. And the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Elliot Abrams, Michael Ledeen, all these neocon psychopaths who brought us the war in Iraq, who brought us the Project for the New American Century in the year 2000, September. It's all the same old faces and the same stupid idiots who can only make wars everywhere. And now they get a proxy to do it in hopes that he blows up the Middle East and draws Iran into a war. And I don't think the Iranians are that foolish. I think they're much more clever, nor the Hezbollah, who are in the dominant position in Lebanon. So it's the war in Yemen was a catastrophe for Salman. Catastrophe, a human catastrophe also, but in terms of any stated goals, the man is incompetent from the get-go. And I think the Israelis are playing a game with him to count on the fact he'll create maximum chaos, and through the chaos, Israel will kind of rearrange the chessboard behind everybody's back, or Netanyahu, let's say.
You know, which is funny, because what I look at their plan, when I take like a bird's eye view of their plan, I see and I know you see the same problems as well. I don't think Israel's learned much of anything from their last confrontation with Hezbollah back in 2006, when they had to have that debacle under Ehud Olmert, which is Operation Cast Lead, which was a horrible disaster where the entire IDF was pretty much held up by one battalion of Hezbollah. And they couldn't do it.
Oh, yeah.
They were literally grinding up the Israelis and spitting them out.
I think they want kind of a revenge, and this doesn't happen. You know, if you act on a motive of revenge, you get blown in your face.
Correct. What do you think the end game is here? What they're trying to pull here with this whole maneuver, and how, in the grand scheme of things, how it will blow back on Israel, the United States, and also what do you think the angles for China and Russia? Because we know, you and I both know, that China has been involved and been in Yemen since 1954. Most Americans don't know that, but what's your take, William?
The area of Yemen, the disputed territory between the deserts of Saudi Arabia and the deserts of Yemen, I was told by an American intelligence spook 20 years ago in Washington, when I was there for a meeting connected with the U.S. Treasury, that area holds enough oil, undeveloped oil, to feed the entire oil demand of the planet for 50 years or more. So whether the Saudis are aware of that, probably the U.S. hasn't informed them. But I think the game in all of this is U.S., what Kissinger said in the 1970s, if you control the oil, you control entire nations. And that's still the case. Now it's oil and gas, natural gas. But that's what the war in Syria is largely about, the huge gas reserves of the Persian Gulf from Qatar and Iran, and pipelines going through Iraq and Syria to the European Union, or not going through, and who's going to dominate that. So it's very much, I think, a war for control of the energy choke point of the entire world economy. Those are pretty big stakes. Yeah. And so far, the United States has boggled it up pretty badly.
Yeah, absolutely correct. We look at the Chinese and the Russians and the rest of the world, predominantly the whole Sino-Russian nexus, building out the One Belt, One Road initiative, as well as the Eurasian Economic Zone. We've seen the investments of China and Russia, both in Africa, elevating so many countries out of poverty. Even in this Chinese decade, where they've pulled over the last decade and a half, pulled over 700 million people out of poverty. Why is it that the West simply fails to do anything? How come we can't cut deals, but rather than cutting deals, we're always bombing countries? And why? What's our fascination with the military-industrial complex, William? Could you please break that down for us?
Let's narrow that down a little more precisely. Sure. It's the military-industrial complex that dominates politics in Washington, the cesspool of corruption known as the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government. They control the policies. Four generals are controlling the foreign policies and defense policies of Donald Trump, DJ Trump, as I call him. And their agenda is to make war and chaos everywhere in hopes of creating something called the New World Order, as David Rockefeller called it in his memoirs, or one world government. And in reality, it's one world dictatorship that's dominated top down by a sole superpower called Washington, or called the U.S. military and Wall Street. And it's not the American people. The American people are blissfully ignorant about the role that they're being forced to play as patsies, or most of them are. And they get sent from one war to the next, and now again in Afghanistan. What is this? How many years have we been playing this game in Afghanistan to support the opium cultivation of the the Afghanistan warlords?
Yeah.
This is the CIA game in Afghanistan. The U.S. Pentagon also is complicit in this. So the world is getting tired of this nonsense. It's not the West. It's not the West. The Europeans are chafing at the bit. German industry is furious with Washington for these sanctions against Russia over this coup d'etat that Washington staged in Kiev. How many Americans know that it was a coup d'etat staged by the U.S. State Department, Victoria Nuland, the neocon Assistant Secretary for Eastern and European Affairs,
yeah,
and the U.S. Ambassador Jeff Pyatt in Kiev, together with John Brennan, the knuckle-dragging CIA head back then, and they staged a coup d'etat with snipers killing demonstrators as well as police to create panic and bring in a bunch of literally neo-Nazis with swastikas tattooed on their arms and praising the virtues of Stefan Bandera, a Nazi collaborator during World War II. And this is pretty ugly stuff. But that's Washington foreign policy. That's neocon foreign policy to drive a wedge between Russia and the European Union, which was developing in a peaceful and very productive way for both sides. And suddenly someone threw a nuclear hand grenade in the middle of that called Kiev and the Maidan color revolution.
Yeah. Most Americans don't have any idea of that at all, especially when Victoria Nuland was caught red-handed on the telephone saying, F the EU, we paid $5 billion for this operation. And yet that's never picked up by mainstream media. Mainstream media and most Americans think that, Ukraine is Russian aggression. The Russophobia runs very strong. And it pains me. It pains me to see how we in the West are so duped by what's going on. It's ridiculous, William. It really is.
How many people have looked at these revelations from the former head of the Democratic National Committee about Hillary Clinton rigging the primaries inside the party against Biden and what's his name, to make Hillary the candidate?
Yeah, Obama.
No, Joe Biden. That last election.
Oh, right.
Hillary, Biden, and Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And these are devastating revelations. The Hillary scandal with the uranium, the Russian uranium deal, and the payoffs that were involved in that to the Clinton Foundation. It's not on the blood on the Russian side. They're just doing typical business like most multinational corporations do. The blood is on Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State and her husband Bill Clinton raking in $100 million or whatever the amount was for the Clinton Foundation for Hillary's work in moving the uranium deal.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty dirty stuff. So, to blame it all on the Russians is a diversion, and it's a huge diversion. It's, there's not one thread of credible independent proof that the Russians did anything to influence the U.S. elections. That's not their character. I know Russia quite well. I go there very often. I have very close Russian friends. And it's not their modus of working, nor the Chinese.
Right.
What would it bring them?
They have nothing to gain. Just like the so-called Iranian missile that magically appeared out of Yemen. and was
Yeah.
magically intercepted by Saudi air defenses.
By Raytheon's incompetent missile defense system.
Yeah, and that's what terrifies me, William. The military-industrial complex, you and I well know, is nothing more than a wealth extraction bureaucracy. It has nothing to do about winning wars. It has nothing to do with developing effective weapon systems, but effective marketing materials. That's what I've seen very good that's been coming out of the military-industrial complex. We see the disaster that's the F-35. We see the disaster that's the missile shield, and how we're so brazen because these idiots have duped Congress that we can willy-nilly go ahead and confront North Korea, and any missile they shoot off, we can intercept it, when we can't even intercept a biplane, a Sopwith Camel flying through the air with our missile defense system. It's horrendous.
I'll give you an example. In the last months, North Korea has allegedly fired 2 of its missiles directly over Japanese airspace, over the Japanese islands.
Right.
Not one of those missiles was fired at by the brilliant American anti-missile defense system that Washington and the Pentagon installed in Japan. They're just not able to do it. It's an incompetent system that's, it's a joke. If you want to talk about competent anti-missile intervention technologies, look at what the Russians have. Look at the S-400, the S-500 systems. This is bleeding edge technology. The United States, the Pentagon is so corrupt that the U.S. Army, the Inspector General of the Defense Department last year certified that the U.S. Army, only the Department of the Army, had $6.5 trillion of unaccounted for spending in the last years that no paper audit trail existed. They could have been spent on prostitutes in Thailand. They could have been spent on vacation resorts for generals in Fiji or Canary Islands or whatever. There's no paper trail that the American Congress or the American population can know what it was spent on. It's out of control. It's like the Roman Empire of 400 AD. It's a cesspool.
Yep, absolutely. It is a cesspool. I mean, there's no difference to it. It's we are over, and just like the Romans, William, we are overestimating our own strength. In other words, we're believing our own BS, and we're underestimating the strength of our rivals, and we're overestimating their weaknesses. That's what's happening. We're overestimating our strength and then overestimating their weaknesses at the same time, which is a dangerous combination.
Well, look at what Russia did, what Putin did when he saw this U.S. He knew he's not at all uneducated in ways of intelligence. He knew exactly what the U.S. had done in Kiev in 2014 February with the coup d'etat. Instead of getting bogged down in a war in Ukraine, which Victoria Nuland and her pals deeply had hoped, so that NATO could really have an excuse to go after Russia, Putin simply turned to the east. He turned his view and cultivated deep ties with China and then with other countries in Eurasia, the Eurasian Economic Union. And that has transformed the geopolitical and geoeconomic map of the world in the last 4 years. 3 years, 3.5 years.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. William, what do you think in the next coming years? What are some of the hot spots, some of the things that are on your radar? How do you see certain events that you've been following, especially in this critical juncture, on the cusp of the end of the petrodollar, all these other things, China rolling out the new petro yuan with a gold trade settlement, all these things, so many things. I could have you on for days, but what's on your radar that's keeping you up at night, so to speak?
Oh, I try to sleep at night so I can work during the day. The most important development, in my view, that's going on in the world today is the building up of new infrastructure entire new economic markets, a new geoeconomics is building up across Eurasia. And Eurasia has something like 42% of the world population. It has every conceivable raw material that you would ever need, plus Russia, China, everything in between, including Iran and potentially Turkey. And the fact that China and Russia are cooperating on the Belt Road Initiative, which originally was called the New Economic Silk Road, to build high-speed rail links. I'm working on a piece for NEO, the website that I contribute to regularly, about a project between a Chinese group and a Russian group on the border of China and Mongolia and Russia. One of the biggest copper mining concentrations in the world that was completely undeveloped 4 years ago. And 2 days ago, they began mining that, and they built rail links, they built highways, and so it was undeveloped because in the Soviet Union, every penny was devoted toward the arms race with NATO, and they had nothing left over for developing gold or copper mines and so forth. So this is now being developed, and the copper is needed for the Silk Road. Of course, you know, there are high-speed rails, and so they need a lot of copper. The other minerals that are there, gold is part of it. And this is what's going on. The Chinese and the Russians are collaborating in a way that has never taken place, never during the Sino-Soviet Stalin-Mao era in the 1950s after the war.
Yeah.
Because that was a domination game between Russia, between Stalin and Mao, and the Chinese didn't at all like that. Now we have a very different roadmap, and Putin is sophisticated enough to know that, and the Chinese are sophisticated enough to understand that certain things Russia has to bring to the table the Chinese don't have, and the combination of those two is freaking out the neocons in Washington, to put it mildly. They don't know what to do. They tried this game with Putin and Mike Flynn and so forth at the beginning of Trump, that we'll be buddy with Russia if you double cross China, and Putin didn't buy that at all. And then a few months later, Trump tried the same game with Xi Jinping when he invited him to his Florida mansion, and at the same time they were having dessert. Trump, without telling Xi Jinping, was bombing Syria. So it's a failing empire. It's a collapsing oligarchy. It's not the American people. The American people have been really given the short end of the stick in all of this. Look at the state of the middle class. Look at the declining income. Look at the soaring costs of university education over the last 25 years. Look at the debts. Look at everything going on. We're being played for fools by a bunch of pathetic oligarchs with names like Soros or Buffett or used to be Rockefeller. There are other Rockefellers still around playing that game. Bill Gates, he's a part of this group of so-called good club. They call themselves the good club. And they simply want to get rid of several billion people off the face of the earth. So they're losing everywhere. And this is the good news. I want to give your listeners a little bit of sense of this. This is the good news. People are fed up with these wars. When the president of a tiny island group called the Philippines, that used to be an American colony and still almost is with the American military presence, when the president of the Philippines, Duterte, stands up and calls the U.S. ambassador a gay son of a bitch for attacking his war on drugs, and then calls the president of the United States a son of a whore, you know that the shock and awe of Washington is in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
And I think that's to the good.
Yes.
To be honest, I think that's to the good, that people are not intimidated by a bunch of bullies in Washington going around, shaking a stick and trying to beat them into submission. So I'm pretty optimistic, to be honest. The European Union is a mess. It's collapsing of its own internal contradictions, but that opens the way to individual countries linking up with the Silk Road, and that's going to happen. It's there's no way around it. It's going to happen, and at a certain point, maybe there will be a counterfaction inside the U.S. establishment that recognizes reality and says this war game is a no-brainer. It doesn't work, and says, okay, let's get on board. Let's build up. Let's rebuild. I read something earlier today that the Brown University did a very thorough study of the true costs of the wars that Washington is engaged in since 9/11. And the true costs they estimate, Pentagon estimated 1.5 trillion. That's still a lot. They estimate $5.6 trillion. Maybe that's conservative. That we have wasted on a war in Iraq. What has that brought us? On a war in Afghanistan. What has that brought us? On a war against Syria, a war against Libya, everywhere you look. And this isn't a war on terror, it's a war on the American taxpayer. So think if we took that $5.6 trillion over the last 17 years, 16 years, and invested that in rebuilding the basic economic infrastructure, building like China has done, high-speed rail links crisscrossing America for transportation, rebuilding the power grid, rebuilding the water supply, investing in real education, not kindergarten dumbing down, and created real jobs in America again, like in the 50s and 60s. Imagine what that could bring. And then the United States could become a responsible world citizen again. But these lunatics called the Wall Street gods of money, I call them in the title of one of my books, they don't care about that. They don't care about us. We're just cannon fodder to be ground up as meatloaf for some war somewhere to open the way for more looting by their corporations. And this is stupid. Really, it's very stupid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely correct, man. It's dumb beyond dumb. It's short-sighted, and it amazes me that the American public is still glamorized by this militiatainment, for lack of a better word. It's Veterans Day, and my heart breaks that we have sent so many young, talented men and women to the most dangerous parts of this world and seen them blown to bits, come back in body bags, and or if they come back maimed or mentally traumatized, that we do nothing for them. We don't care for them, and yet we're told to blindly pledge allegiance to the troops, blindly support them. And people need to take a stand and understand that this whole nonsense of Washington, that we're fighting for freedom. I mean, I want to vomit every time I hear that we're fighting for freedom and democracy. It's such a euphemism. I can't stand it.
I would like at this point to tell your readers about the book, my latest book that I'm about to publish in English. It's called Manifest Destiny. The subtitle is Democracy as Cognitive Dissonance. And it keys off a quote in George Orwell's 1984. Peace is war, freedom is slavery, love is hate, or something to those effects. And that creates a cognitive dissonance. So when we're told that every war we fight, just every country we destroy, is to bring democracy. That's a cognitive dissonance.
Correct.
And the book details how this has worked since 1980s, when Ronald Reagan's director of CIA, Bill Casey, came up with the idea to create a national endowment for democracy, a private, quote unquote, government financed but private NGO that would go all around the world, not as the CIA, because they had been uncovered too many times behind coups d'etats and so forth in Guatemala and Iran and who knows where, Chile, that they would do this as private NGOs, and they created an entire human rights democracy industry. I call it fake democracy in the book, to destabilize nations, get rid of governments that don't play by the rules of the Wall Street and military industrial complex, and create chaos everywhere. From the collapse of the Soviet Union, the destruction, the rape of Russia, the war in Yugoslavia, all of this has been done as fake democracy NGOs right up to the present day. The Arab Spring, Libya, Syria, the whole thing. George Soros, all of this. So Manifest Destiny, the book should be out, I would estimate, sometime shortly before the end of the year, around mid-December, if everything goes well with the printing and so forth. And I think it's something that would be very useful for a lot of Americans to realize what the game is that we're being manipulated to play.
Yeah, and the manipulation runs deep. It's it's so important. It's so vital. What do you think is what's your outlook, William, in the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months here in the U.S. as well as the world? I see a global economic reset coming. I see the dollar being deposed. It already is being deposed at a rapid clip in terms of world reserve currency, as well as a petrodollar. I think the Americans' way of life is about to drastically change. What say you?
The banks of Wall Street, the Federal Reserve, and the U.S. Treasury will blow the bubble up when they decide it's time for them to blow the bubble up and reorganize again, like they did in 2007, 2008, when Henry Paulson of Goldman Sachs was Treasury Secretary and hijacked Congress for $700 billion to bail out his Wall Street friends. So it's a bubble, it's untenable, it's unviable. The stock market is insane. The valuations go up because companies are buying their own stock back off of the market, more than $1 trillion, according to reports I've seen. And it's not because the economy is booming. We're in real terms. My friend John Williams, who does shadow government statistics,
shadow stats, estimates the unemployment unemployment, if we counted people wanting to work but not finding it, is 22 to 23%. That's 1930s level unemployment. Yep.
The economic situation of the United States of America today really, to put it bluntly, sucks.
Yes.
It's not a healthy situation. So,
correct.
And Donald Trump, with all his yammer about making America great again, is, making Wall Street and his billionaire friends great again, but certainly not the country.
Yeah. I mean, he's also being resisted at such a level he can't seem to get anything done. I'm waiting for something. It's just it's terrible what's being done, William. It's absolutely terrible.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of positive things going on in the world, and that's what I try to bring to the fore here, that people realize it's not by any means black and dark completely.
Yep, absolutely. Can you tell us, we got about 5 more minutes left. Why don't you give your closing comments, and please plug your website if you have any social media as well, and again, your book and where people can purchase it.
Just type that in and you'll find it. And if you go onto my website as a new reader, you'll find an invitation for a free geopolitical newsletter that I put out roughly twice a month. And all you do is sign up and give your email address, and you get this newsletter. And the reason I do that is that people can become more familiar with excerpts from some of my books and some of my earlier writings that haven't been published. And the books themselves are available through Amazon and through my website. They're all listed there. But if you just click on the website, you'll find everything. What shall I say to sum up? I think we as a nation are being deliberately disturbed by not only the Trump administration, but by George Soros's NGOs, the Democratic Party, and so forth. The Black Lives Matter, which is funded by George Soros, it's a spook operation.
Well, I mean, George Soros really loves minorities, William. I think you might. Did you know that?
I don't find convincing evidence of that, but maybe I overlooked something.
He's just an ever-loving Nazi. He's just so full of love.
Yeah. But the point is, all of this is being deliberately orchestrated. Donald Trump would never have gotten close to the White House if the powers that be, the patriarchs of America, the Rockefellers, the Buffetts, the Bushes, and so forth, did not choose Trump. And his job is to keep people upset, angry, and confused. Because if you're upset, angry, and confused, you don't think clearly. You don't have a discussion. Why is America sending more troops after 17 years to Afghanistan? What is this all about? Why are we involved in the war on Syria? What is this all about? What does this do to threaten us? Why are we spending $5.6 trillion on all these crazy wars that we just lose? Who is that benefiting beyond the military-industrial complex? It's certainly not the American men and women of the armed forces. They're the victims of this. So if you're confused and stirred up and made angry at false flag or false enemies, then you can't think straight. And that I think is the long and the short of all this anger that we feel as a country and as a people over the last certainly the last year and a half.
Yeah, right. Absolutely correct. With that being said, F. William Engdahl, thank you, sir, for joining us. I thoroughly enjoyed our time together, and I hope to do this again with you very soon. And I'm sure we will, the way things are going in this world. Your insights are incredibly valuable. They're succinct. They're to the point. You paint a very, very vivid picture on this global canvas. So I can't thank you enough for being on.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And thank you all for listening in. Have yourselves a wonderful weekend, and be safe out there, and tune back in Monday morning with our morning show as we get back to our regular schedule. So again, check out William Engdahl over at williamengdahl.com. And folks, keep a lookout for that book, Manifest Destiny, Democracy as Cognitive Dissonance. Very, very important that you pick that up. Thank you all for listening in, and take it away, CJ.